Today, we're diving into a perspective on female sexuality that, let's be honest, challenges some of our most deeply held beliefs. It's a surprising, even countercultural argument. And by the end of this, you might just see modern relationships in a totally new light. Just imagine hearing that in a long-term committed marriage. According to our source material, this isn't some line from a Hollywood script. It's the start of a real conversation that's happening way more often than you'd think. And it kicks off our entire topic today, a dynamic where women are claiming their desire in a radical, powerful new way. So, welcome to what some are calling a bedroom revolution. The really surprising claim here is that these conversations aren't blowing up marriages. In fact, the argument is that they're often making them stronger, more honest, and, believe it or not, more intimate. So, how on earth is that possible? Well, to understand this revolution, we first have to look at what it's rebelling against. And that's the idea that the story we've been told about what women want is incomplete. You know, the script, it casts women as the relationship gender, the ones seeking security, while men are the ones supposedly wired for sexual variety. So on one side, you have the familiar story we all grew up with. But the counterpoint we're exploring today is that female desire is actually fast, it's powerful, and it just refuses to fit into these neat little boxes. The core idea is that for way too long, women have been handed a very, very limited menu of what's considered normal. And you know, reality might be a lot more complex than we think. Surveys cited in our source show that a third of women have had this exact fantasy. But the bigger question here is, how many more hold desires they've never even admitted to themselves? This suggests there's a huge gap between the official script and what's really going on inside our heads. So this brings us to a really crucial shift. The perspective here is that this whole dynamic has evolved from what used to be a male-centric fantasy into one that really centers female agency. It's not about a woman just participating in her husband's script anymore. Oh no. It's about her writing, directing, and starring in her own story of desire. And what's the reported outcome of making this shift? Well, it's a dramatic, and for many, a really surprising explosion in self-confidence. And we're not just talking about feeling more attractive. We're talking about a fundamental change in how these women see themselves and their power in the world. And that confidence, it doesn't just stay in the bedroom. The material suggests these very real, very concrete ripple effects. Women report becoming more assertive in their careers, more willing to go after what they want in all areas of their life. I mean, it makes sense, right? When you practice saying, "This is what I want" in such a vulnerable context, it gets a lot easier to do it everywhere else. You just stop apologizing for taking up space. And this quote just nails it. This is the crucial point. The argument is that the core psychological benefit isn't actually about sexual variety. It's about the radical act of reclaiming ownership over your own body, your own pleasure, and your own choices. It's a powerful move from being an object of desire to becoming the agent of it. Now, this brings us to what might seem like a total paradox. How can something so risky, something that practically invites insecurity hubris into a relationship, actually end up making it stronger? Well, the argument is that the answer lies in extreme vulnerability and communication. Right. This is the elephant in the room. It's always the first question, the biggest objection. But the source material doesn't ignore it. Instead, it proposes that to navigate this successfully, a couple has to completely transform how they relate to the emotion of jealousy itself. So, how do you do that? Well, the process involves a pretty radical reframing. Instead of seeing jealousy as a big red stop sign, you learn to treat it as data, a signal to look inward at your own fears, maybe of loss or inadequacy. The goal isn't to get rid of jealousy, but to transform it from an enemy into a teacher. And after doing the hard work of processing jealousy, a completely different emotion can start to show up: compersion. It's often called the opposite of jealousy. It's that feeling of genuine joy you get from your partner's joy, even when that happiness comes from an experience with someone else. This is presented as the ultimate emotional achievement in these relationships. So why does this lead to stronger intimacy? Because it forces a revolution in communication. You simply can't navigate this territory without being radically, sometimes uncomfortably honest about your desires, your fears, and your boundaries. The idea is that most couples can get by avoiding the really hard conversations. But here, trust has to be actively and constantly built, and that leads to this profound level of connection. This quote perfectly sums up the endgame.
The security in these relationships, according to this perspective, doesn't come from rules and restrictions. It comes from the incredible experience of being able to reveal all of who you are, your deepest desires, your scariest fears, and still be completely and totally loved and accepted by your partner. Okay, so let's zoom out for a minute. This specific dynamic actually connects to a much bigger, more universal theme. This isn't just about one type of relationship. It's about what it means to have freedom, choice, and real authenticity in modern love. And this is a really powerful metaphor used in the source, the invisible cage of shoulds. The argument is that every woman grows up with these bars, made of expectations about how she should behave and what she should want sexually. Escaping this cage isn't about rejecting monogamy. It's about consciously choosing your path, instead of just defaulting to a script someone else wrote for you. So, you might be wondering, why is this conversation bubbling up right now? Well, the material points to a few big cultural factors coming together. Feminist progress has given women more economic and social autonomy. The internet allows people to find information and communities like never before. And frankly, younger generations are just more willing to question the default settings for life and relationships. Now, this is a critical distinction, and it's a big warning from the source. Every single psychological benefit we've talked about only applies when this is a genuine, enthusiastic choice. The difference between empowerment and coercion is everything. If it feels expansive and exciting, it's about desire. But if it feels contracting and anxious, it might be about fear of loss. This is not a fix for a broken relationship. It's an exploration for a strong one. So we'll end with this. We've just walked through a perspective that really challenges convention, and it leaves us with a pretty provocative final question. What if the true measure of a great relationship isn't just the security it provides, but the amount of freedom it allows for each person to be their authentic self? It's a huge question and definitely one worth thinking about.